Tonight, we're talking about what's happening for our preteens and teens in terms of how they're developing. We're going to look a lot at the adolescent brain. We're also going to get the youth perspective on what's happening for preteens and teens as their social context is changing. And though we're going to get some science tonight, I actually think of this session as the key session that builds heart and empathy and understanding for what our kids are going through. And when we understand what and why they're going through this, we can in turn support them better and be better parents and caretakers for them. So I'm really excited about what we're doing tonight. A few notes before we get started. One, those of you who have been here before might notice that our setup is a little different than usual. We're growing, we have more community members joining our space, and we're trying out the webinar format tonight rather than the plain old meetings that you sit in through your workday. So we're going to see how that goes for us. Bear with us as we work out any IT kinks that come along with it, but that's why we look a little bit different. We love questions as always. That hasn't changed. There's actually a Q&A function that you can use. It's there at the bottom of your screen. If you're having trouble with that and you want to go back to good old chat, you can certainly do so as well. But we'll be monitoring that Q&A notepad there. We'll also, as always, be posting a link to the post-event survey. This is what helps us know, are we on the right track? Where should we go from here? How can we be most useful? So please do click on that link and make sure it's waiting for you after our event so we can make sure that we're making this work for everybody and be valuable for everybody. Okay. I'm going to pass this over to Lisa to give us our wonderful group guidelines, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Jackie, and good evening, everyone. We all know parenting is not easy, and parenting around substance use issues is hard. There's no silver bullet, so we try to give you information that you can incorporate into your parenting style to do the best job you can. We are all learning together. Please do not blame yourself for anything that you did or didn't do based on what you learned here tonight. Let's make this a safe space to share ideas and learn while not judging others or giving advice. Keep anything shared here confidential. Self-care is essential in our world now more than ever. Please join us for the full time tonight if you're able. Jackie.
Thank you, Lisa, so much. I'm so excited to introduce our two speakers tonight. I mean that really genuinely. Annie Egan has worked with teens in schools and home settings for over 20 years, rooted in a deep foundational knowledge of adolescent development and with a lens of compassion. Her work focuses on creating effective systems, enhancing communication, and strengthening relationships. I think that's why we're all here tonight. Annie received her BA from Duke University, her master's in counseling psychology from University of San Francisco. We're so lucky to have her. And then our youth speaker tonight, Ria. Some of you might have seen Ria before. I'm super lucky to have gotten to work with Ria in the past year or two as well. And she is just a phenomenal junior at Marin Academy. She has a strong interest in public health, substance misuse prevention, and mental health in that intersection. She's currently focusing on the effect of tobacco on teens through an internship with Bay Area Community Resources, and she serves as a member of the California Youth Advocacy Board. She's presented and shared her perspective on growing issues of substance use to middle schoolers, parents, school boards, and she has a really unique perspective. So we're so lucky to have both of these folks here. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this on to Annie, and we're going to get started.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for linking me to this organization and for inviting me to speak on such a important topic. Obviously, there are lots and lots of presentations on drugs and alcohol and teenagers and all of it. And I think that every time people show up, you're doing the part, right? To know that there are questions to be asked, to know that there are things you can learn, I think is the greatest respect that you can give to the work of parenting. I think the most dangerous is when everyone thinks like, this is, not in my house. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. I always know that it's a choice. So I appreciate you sharing your time with me. So as Jackie said, yes, this is mostly going to be about offering information that hopefully instills some compassion and awareness and a different frame potentially for how you are thinking about your teenager. There is, I don't even know if I would call it science. It is the lightest science you might ever see, if this is science. Which is with great intention. So if you are expecting more science, you can just kind of do a little voodoo shift and manage those expectations, because this really is more about thoughts, feelings, some brain spaces, but there will be no word that you're going to have to look up and see how to translate or pronounce. That's not what this is about. So the adolescent brain, how to support when they are wired for risk. Okay. Oops. Gas pedal to the floor with the brakes on back order. So this is, often a lot of things about teenagers are a little satirical, right? They're a little sarcastic. It's supposed to be, they're supposed to be tough and, this hard age. But I like to think of them as far more just complex and growing and inspirational and so loaded with all of looking at this visual, the love hate, the yin yang. They're just loaded with that type of complexity, right? That pull me close, but I need to be separate, right? I still want to cuddle in bed when I'm having a bad day, but my gosh, don't ever talk to me in front of my friends, right? Think about how challenging that is to walk through your world that way. Right. And they do that every space, every day, all the time for years and years and years. Right. When we think about us as adults and how, or I don't know if everybody feels like this, but I often feel like one of the best pieces of coming into your own is being able to be authentically you in as many spaces as you can be authentically you. That's kind of the most kind of equilibrium that we can have when you find a workplace that really meets your natural space, that you can speak freely, that you can be with your family in a way that your values are aligned. It just kind of gives you a sense of calm, right? So for teenagers, they're in this complex system of the yin yang, whatever that yin yang is, in so many spaces. So I just think that is what makes them so ripe for just, they never cease to surprise you. Right? There's always something that is new and different that comes out of their mouth or their mind or their body that is just kind of makes you lose your breath. So the parts of the adolescent brain that I think are the most of note, okay? Prefrontal cortex, which everybody talks about, is not developed until they're about 25. And that's the part that does all of their executive functioning, okay? It's like the CEO. And that is under construction. So that is a lot for judgment. It's a lot for decision making. It's for future planning. It's for prioritization. It is for all of those things that you would hope the CEO of the company would do. There are lots of these parts that show up sometimes in ways that are marvelous and incredible. When you think about how accomplished a 15-year-old can be at organizing 12 of their friends to buy tickets at the same time for the same show and get the transportation and do a fundraising bake sale to get the money for it. And everybody seems to remember the right, container to bring the muffins in and to get it back in the cash box and all that stuff. And they're there early at school and they have the release to put on the bake sale in the morning and all of those pieces. And they have in their gym bag their clothes for the volleyball practice, and then they're going to go to the sleepover, and they remember their shampoo and their good scrunchie for the dance that night, and to be able to get dressed there, and they have the shoes. They are quite able to accomplish so many feats of planning and organization and logistics, right? That a CEO would also do. And at the same time, you're wondering, like, wait a second, they did all of this yesterday, and they're calling me at noon because they forgot their science project that they've been working on for like 3 months, and that didn't come to mind, right? So again, this yin yang, they're really complex. There's a lot of stuff up there for them to hold and to balance. And what we will find is very often they will be able to do a lot more in that prefrontal cortex when it's something that is truly meaningful for them, right? Not to say that they don't care about school or their science project, but when something is that connected, right, in terms of thinking about going to a concert with 12 of my best friends, they likely will, they will likely use all of that energy and that mind to be able to target, right? And to hone and to use all of those skills that they have in the prefrontal cortex to make things happen. The amygdala, I always think, is the most interesting part of the teenage brain. Everybody gets a lot of talk about this prefrontal cortex and its underdevelopedness. I think what makes teenagers do most of what they do that feels like, huh? And why everybody comes to these talks is this amygdala. All right. So the amygdala is the fight, flight, freeze. This is the most primitive part of your brain. It's what reptiles have, right? It is what keeps you out of danger from a bear. It is what keeps you able to run out of a burning building. It is what gets activated when you see a kid run into the middle of the street and you leap over fences and seem to be able to grab the child in midair and hold the car up at the same time, right? It is a very, very powerful and incredibly important part of our brain. When it's activated, okay, it is a stress response. Cortisol shoots through your body. That's what gives you that strength and that surge, right? And cortisol is not awesome to have running through your brain, your veins all the time. It's not something that is desirable when you think about, children or humans or any age living in a war-torn country, right? Or people with trauma sustained, or that's what they're talking about, right? People with exposure to increased levels of that stress response over and over and over again is not good for your body. Teenagers, at this time in their world, it is the most active than any other time in our life. So that means that a 4-year-old brain and a 44-year-old brain might see something and say, okay, I'm not in danger. And the 14-year-old brain will think that they are being harmed. And that definition of harm, the types of things that might turn on that response for a teenager, often, it's not being chased by a bear, right? It might be being misunderstood. It might be shame. It might be disconnect. It might be feeling excluded. It might be embarrassed. Okay. Those are things that to a teenager would elicit a response from an amygdala. Okay. You will notice this very frequently. An easy example is if you had a conversation with a teenager who responds with, "Stop yelling at me." And the parent is like, "I am really not yelling. I was using this voice," right? And that's this moment of, and then it often becomes a thing because you're not yelling. "I'm not yelling. I'm just asking you a question. Can you just respond to the question? You're just yelling at me. Just stop yelling at me," right? That is an immediate hand up. Okay, this is an amygdala moment for this kid. I might not know why, right? Maybe it's because I said something that wasn't positive, right? That can be enough, right? It can also be something that is already a source of disappointment for a kid, right? So if you say, "Hey, how was lunch today?" Okay, pretty innocuous question. If lunch was awful, right? Maybe your son or daughter made a really kind of bad choice at lunch. Maybe they were unkind to a friend. Maybe they didn't go meet with the teacher that they were supposed to meet during lunch. Maybe they wanted to do their homework during lunch and study for that test and they forgot, right? Who knows? Who knows what happened? But suddenly you asking that question, completely innocuous, no hidden agenda, brings up this response that doesn't match, right? So that when the response does not match the question, that's your moment to pause. Okay? There's nothing you're going to say at that moment that is going to have them believe that you are, in fact, you don't need to get into it about the volume of your voice, right? What you need to do is be the bigger, more aware person in that conversation to know that I'm not going to engage. Like, this is just not the time. I'm not going to be mad at them for being, disrespectful or rude or whatever. Like, I'm just going to know something's going on. We're going to pause, right? All good. right? We can talk about this after later, after dinner. Do you want to go to your room, or do you want to go, help set the table? Like, we're all good, right? You just move on. That is your gift to them, right? And it doesn't mean that you can never return to the question that you asked, but you will be able to notice when they've calmed. You also might be able to get a little window into something else that went down, right? So if they went up to their room, let's say, maybe after, some time and they settle, you have the grace of time to be able to go sit, knock on the door, like, hey, did something happen today? And they may be like, yeah, I had the worst day. Like, I just didn't get anything done and I'm behind in my stuff, and who knows, right? But if you got into it with them at the time of that disconnect, you would not get that information, right? When you're in a hot moment filled with stress and fear and shame, that is not just generally when people open up, right? You got to give it that space so they can settle. The other piece that the amygdala does is, excuse me for just a second, sorry, is that it allows them to be able to express themselves without their words, right? So a fight might look like just like a fight in the hall, right? That's not surprising. Flight might look like they are running up to their room or exiting a situation. They're leaving the premises, right? They just can't handle it. What often we see is the freeze. Freeze for a teenager. If you're out in the woods, there's some animals. I don't know which ones at the moment. I always am scared that I'm going to get this wrong, but I feel like there's some animals you're supposed to run very fast from. There's other animals that freezing might be helpful, right? So your teenager might freeze. And what that might look like is they don't care, right? Like, I'm asking you a question. Like, answer the question. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, you have nothing, right? And that might be an important topic, right? Which, when the teenager isn't responding, it makes the parent often feel like they don't think it's important, right? When in fact, more often than not, the teenager knows exactly how important it is. They might be terrified themselves, right? They're already in a stress space and they're frozen, right? They don't know how to respond. So to be able to have that in the back of your mind, and it takes a little bit to remember, right? The fight is super easy to understand, right? But the freeze often can look so different, right? It's not as aggressive, obviously, it's nothing, right? It's a blank stare. But to have that moment of reckoning of, hey, I'm seeing a blank stare, I'm gonna pause for a second. This might be one of those amygdala things. Okay, and I'll say this like a zillion times, but you cannot have a conversation with an amygdala, period. So this little visual, right, on the right is, I think, most notably, regardless of the words on it, the most notably is just visually to see how different this brain looks at 5, preteen, teen, and 20, right? Think about how different, right, this prefrontal cortex looks here to there. Okay, that is a lot of growing, right? The brain grows the same amount between 14 and 17 as it did between 0 and 3. Those are the two big growth spurts of a brain. So if you remember your teenager as a 0 to 3-year-old and think, wait, they're like masquerading around in this like body of a grown-up person, and yet their brain has that much more to grow as they did between 0 and 3. It's amazing, right? I mean, it really is. I mean, to me, that's as scientific as I'm going to get. Like, it's a scientific feat, I think. I really do. I just think it's amazing. And to think that they are doing all of that in ways that are just not as visual, right? You look at a 0 to 3-year-old, it's very obvious. They're learning to talk, they're learning to walk, they're learning to use their utensils, they're learning how to get their needs met. I mean, all of those things that are so obvious. And a 14 to 17-year-old is going through all of that same level of growth, but without any of kind of the recognition, right? We don't get to celebrate their first steps. We don't get to celebrate their, oh my gosh, you fluidly made a decision-making process that incorporated all of your values and priorities. Like, that doesn't get spoken like that, right? So I think it's a nice thing to remember that they really are growing. They have a lot of things to accomplish, and they are working really, really hard all the time to be able to do it, right? So I think that it's just nice to know. The other thing that brain is doing is developing feedback loops with the brain's reward system. So this is telling the brain, what do I do that feels good? And how do I get to do it again? Okay, as simple as that can make it, right? So it feels good to get a little bit of dopamine. Dopamine is the stuff that makes you feel good, right? So I'm going to do this activity because it made me feel good. And then I'm going to put it through this circuit that's going to have me remember, right? It's going to remind me, hey, go back to there because that felt good. Okay, so that is what is happening really intensely during this time, more intensely than any other time. So this dopamine piece, and you'll notice a lot of this presentation is not focused entirely on drugs and alcohol, okay? Because a lot of this is, you know, it's whether we're talking about drugs and alcohol or technology or, you know, any type of experience that we're trying to, you know, convey healthy habits to our kids, it's relatively the same. You will see substances inserted here, but a lot of this you can apply to a lot of different teenage spaces. So dopamine, again, is what makes you feel good, right? So when you think about, I'm sure that most of you have heard that you get more dopamine from, you know, the likes on your Facebook. I mean, not that Facebook is relevant anymore, but back in the day, that, you know, every time you got a like on your Facebook page, your dopamine levels boosted. Okay, so this is a pretty powerful part of our system and our reward circuit. Okay, we want it. Teenagers have a general lower level of dopamine, okay, in adolescence than we do. It's being taken away from other parts of the brain, and instead it's going to help develop the prefrontal cortex, which is good. We need it. We can lend it for a little bit so that part of the brain gets what it needs. But what that means is that teenagers actually have higher highs and lower lows than we do. So when they are saying, oh my gosh, like I can't possibly get off the television right now, or their phone, or, you know, whatever it is, like I really, 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 really need to watch this, right? And a parent is saying like, honey, I know, like I would love to sit and watch television too. I get it, right? It's actually not same. The joy that they get from that is in fact more than the joy that we get from it. Okay, same thing with the low. Honey, I know, I'm disappointed too. I really wanted to go to that restaurant. I was looking forward to it, but it's closed. So I don't know what you want me to do, right? Their low is lower, right? What they built up as an expectation and a hope and the circuit that this is going to make me feel good, right? When that doesn't happen, that low goes lower because their resting dopamine level is lower than ours, right? So we can generally be more okay at our resting level than they are. Okay, it's always weird to me not to see faces, but I hope that makes sense. So with substances, right, they find something that gives them a pretty significant dopamine boost, right? Substances are very effective, right? I mean, they might not be good, but they are certainly really good at what they do. So there is a cycle, right, that they go and get this big boost. And then when they come off of it, it's really more boring, right? Because of their resting level is lower. So now they've felt this high and they are coming down without it, and it feels that much lower. So it makes a lot of sense that they would want to continue to do it, right? They would want to do it more and more and more because they would want to feel better, right? It makes, I mean, it's very logical, right? Some of their behavior is not logical at all, right? It's not necessarily problematic, but you can't always put, you know, one and one together to make two. These are logical. And then to complicate matters, we have hormones. The hormone of of most interest in terms of substances is testosterone. So testosterone is inserted, excuse me, and it comes through in surges with boys and girls, far more with boys in terms of the quantities, but it's in both. And it changes the reward center. And there is a motivational shift towards novelty, arousal, achieving social status, and risk-taking. This is the piece that is incredibly important. And you'll see kind of as a through line to a lot of these future slides. Despite fear or vulnerability. So a lot of people think if my kid knew the information, if they knew how dangerous this was, if they knew that they could get hurt, that they would in fact make a different decision. That is actually not true. Okay, so it is, which makes, I mean, this is not anything comforting necessarily to parents. I wish, again, I'm glad that it was led with there's no magic ticket, magic bullet here. But it is important to know so that when you're feeling like, I don't get it, like they know this is risky. I've told them over and over and over again, and they're still making these decisions, right? You can stop kind of wasting your time thinking that that's going to be the ticket. It doesn't mean you don't share information, right? I mean, that's, it never hurts to share information, but that's not going to be their deciding factor. For them and decision-making, right, they can make good decisions, right? So when you think about that prefrontal cortex, I do appreciate that they distinguish long-term decision-making, right, versus short-term, because decision-making really, in its kind of 30,000-foot view is value-based, okay? So they make decisions all the time. They're just not the decisions that we would make, right? They're based on their values. So if you think about a friendship, okay, and there is some friend at night who is having a really hard time and they're sad, and there is a group of people who are supporting that friend on a group chat or something, and it is bedtime. And a parent comes in and wants to take the phone away. And the friend is like, I can't, I need to help my friend, right? That is in fact a sound decision, because what they are charged to do right now, right, with their primary developmental tasks is forging social relationships, right, their peers. That is a huge piece, that's their job, right? And getting sleep is not part of their developmental tasks. It's something we know that they need, right? But that's not actually what they're charged with accomplishing in terms of what is important to them, right? So in that moment, the risk of losing that friendship, the risk of what people might be saying if I leave that chat and someone else joins and is like, well, where's Annie? Like, I thought she was your best friend. Like, she doesn't even care. She's not even up. I don't understand. She chose herself. She like went to bed, right? Like that risk, if you're a risk assessor, right, in terms of decision-making, it wouldn't make sense to choose to get off of that call. If you're an adult, right, I know that I need sleep. I know that, right? I know that it is important for me to be able to go and wake up in the next day and be in front of a client and not yawn, right? That would be really unpleasant for everybody involved, right? So that's important to me. It's also important to me that I have history with friends that gives me the security that says, hey, Sarah, God, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I have to head out, okay? I have a break in my day tomorrow at around 10 o'clock. Can I come over? I'll bring coffee. Anything else I can do? What are you gonna do to take care of yourself right now? What are you gonna put on Netflix? Talk to me, give me your plan, okay? Because I'm gonna go to bed, but I love you and I wanna make sure that you're good, right? I know that Sarah is not gonna talk smack about me. I know that I'm gonna wake up the next day and we're gonna be able to support each other at 10 a.m., right? I don't have that risk because I have experience, right, in different perspectives. A teenager does not, right? It's not that they're narrow. It's not that they're, not thinking clearly. They don't have that breadth of life to be able to discern that this friendship will in fact be intact if I am able to do that. It's a risk every time they make that choice, which is why parents do what they do, because it's not natural for the teen to do it for themselves. Okay. So I think that that's an important piece of this, is that their decisions, they can make them. They will just very frequently be different than the ones that we want them to make. So when we're looking at drugs and alcohol and the risk, right, the long-term impact of that use is often through facts and figures and charts, right? And, oh, sorry, there's a T in there. That information is alarming to adults, right? And we're thinking like, oh, geez, we're activated here. That is not the way a teen brain gravitates, right? They're not looking at that fact and that figure in their chart as something that is applicable to them. And not because they think that they're invincible, right? There's a lot of that too, that people are like, oh, teenagers just think they're invincible. They don't think they're invincible, right? It might well happen to them, but they're going to take the risk. Again, the risk is the fun. That's the point. If it was safe, if I never thought I'd get hurt, then there is no risk. And therefore there is no arousal. And therefore that is not satisfying my thirst for that, right? So it is inherently the risk that drives that behavior. And then if you're coupling that with the social space, right? If I can engage in behavior that not only boosts my dopamine, right? And accomplishes and sates my arousal need, and I get to do it with my friends, like win-win, right? Makes sense. So adolescents are often driven by feeling and connection, right? Not these facts and figures. So that's why they're incredibly good friends, right? When you think about, there is this weird thing about teenagers being selfish, and they are literally the most selfless humans I have ever encountered. They would do anything for someone in need. And I mean, often that is the disconnect, right? Is like, honey, you got to put yourself first. You know, these adults are the ones coming at them, trying to kind of curb that natural instinct for them to care for each other, and to put something like school or their health or their, you know, I mean, I'm saying these sarcastically as if they're silly things. They're not silly, right? But things that really only affect them, right? That is hard for them to do frequently. Right? An act of generosity is often very easy for them to do. So they don't respond with that information data, right? So they will respond with connection, which is again, why this lens I think is so important, right? The facts and the data and the shoving of the information and the rules and the rigidity, that is not going to reach them, right? That connection is where you get your bang for your buck. How am I supposed to think about consequences before they happen? It's very sound. So this novelty-seeking behavior, so many good parts of this. There are so many good parts that we see in teenagers. This ability to do something scary is what allows them to start a club, right? It is what allows them to ask someone to dance. It allows them to get up and give a presentation. Right? If you think about the number of things that these kids do on any given day, right? I mean, sometimes I'm even dropping my kid off at school and just in the morning, and I'm thinking, who is he going to go stand next to? Right? Like he's going to walk into this like giant playground. How does he know where to go? Like, is anyone looking at him? Like, is he, you know, like that need for us to think about the little bits of things that we do hard in a day, right? We are really comfortable a lot of the time, right? And teenagers are very often asked to stretch. And I think, you know, it can be really exhausting, right? And so no wonder sometimes they're a little bit on edge, right? But it also is what allows their brain to grow. So if your child is one that needs big risks, right? Often you will know this very early on. It is important to help create healthy ones, because the biology of this, right? That surge, that need for arousal, that need for dopamine, that's not going to change. That's nature, right? So if you know my kid has been seeking that rush, Always. Oh my gosh, when they were 4, they would always be the ones that climb to the highest, the highest thing on the playground, right? They always need more stimulation. They always are, go, 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 right? You would know this. So if you're looking at that kid and you're looking at them starting to be in high school and starting to engage in activities where there might be substances, right? I would be throwing them on a racetrack. I would be making them go rock climbing. I would be taking up mountain biking. I would be, having them stretch themselves in really unusual ways, right? Maybe, hey, you know what? Like, why don't you take the bus? Why don't you take the bus after dinner with your friend by yourself? Right? Let's pick a spot. Let's go over the route, right? And you just go. You'll have your, you have a phone and we'll be able to track. Like, that's novelty seeking behavior, right? So you don't just want to take away the very easy access of drugs and alcohol and not replace it with somebody, right? It's not, you don't want to think like they can just quiet it, right? It's not, this is not a just stop it, quit it, right? You need to replace it with something else that will give them that boost and be able to satiate. So if you think about, a drug that is, starts out relatively harmless in their mind, and then it loses its adrenaline boost, right? The brain, in terms of those circuits, will want more, and they will want different because that other one isn't going to do it anymore, right? The cycle starts to kind of like that's not as exciting anymore. There isn't any novelty, right? This isn't doing it. I need more. I crave more. And again, that's your brain. That's what it's supposed to do. So the other piece that I want to just kind of throw in here, just because I always think it's important to mention, that gateway drug, there was a lot of talk, and I don't know if this has maybe died off enough, but when we were young, that gateway drug used to be thought of as like kind of this risky kid. And once you try this, you're going to go down this dark hole, right? It's not about your kind of choices and your reputation as a little, risk taker. It is more about the brain not being able to get the reward that it once was able to achieve from a substance. Okay. So if you think about, at one point in your life, it may have been that a couple sips of alcohol really would have gotten you a little tipsy, right? That likely is not the case as an adult, right? Or even after your first, 3 times engaging in it. Right. So it's just nature. Like, your brain just starts to be able to absorb inputs, right? And substances and chemicals in a different way. Pruning. This is giant important. Okay. So when you think about those pictures of that brain back in the beginning and how much it changes, right? Part of those changes is pruning. And that is where the brain, it's developed all of these neurons and synapses, tons and tons and tons and tons of inputs, okay, over the course of, 0 to now. And now it starts to use it or lose it. So the area of the brain that you aren't using, the pathways that you aren't using, start to go away. The areas that you do use start to get really solidified, right? So the myelin sheath starts to get smooth, and circuits start to talk to each other much more efficiently and effectively. So it doesn't look like this gobbledygook anymore. It looks more like a system, okay? And that is what happens in your teenage time. So that is also means that that's when habits are formed, right? That's when we get good at things. That's when things get honed. So if you are using drugs as an example, or alcohol, whatever, I'll use that interchangeably really, for stress relief, that habit will become really effective. You'll get really good at it. If you're using drugs for social comfort, right? I'm nervous. If I'm going to a party, I'm going to have a couple drinks so that I get more comfortable and more loosened up to be able to talk to people. It will be much harder to gain those skills when you're sober, right? Because your brain is learning, this is how I do this. How do I talk to people at a party? I have a couple drinks and then I am more comfortable and then I can have a conversation, right? You're losing the circuit of, okay, I take a deep breath, I stand up, I count back from 5 down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I stand up and I say, hey, my name's Annie, it's nice to meet you. That's not being practiced. So that use it or lose it is really, really important. right? The one who is out engaging in sports and activities and learning, right? That's getting used. If you are home all the time playing video games, those areas get a little bit more compromised and you will get very good at playing video games, right? So it's all, it is really, again, just nature. It's not about judgment. It's not about, but you want to think about, are these the skills and tools that I want to hone into my young adult years? This is a really nice place to think about your modeling of substances, okay? If you come home and you are stressed and your go-to is to have a drink, that is modeling, right? When you can walk in the door, oh my gosh, honey, what a day. Ooh, like I would, oh, do you want a glass of wine? Absolutely. Do I ever, right? I'm not saying you're taking, a bottle of gin and chugging it, right? But that communication is, I am stressed, therefore I am having alcohol to make me feel different. Without judgment, that is what that explains, which is just different than, wow, I've had a really, really hard day. Honey, what can I do? I think I just need a few minutes alone. Is that okay? I'm just going to go inside. I'm just going to go sit in my room for just a second. I'll be right back out for dinner. I just need a couple minutes just to kind of breathe and kind of get myself back. Or I've had a really bad day. I think I'm just going to go on a little bit of a walk around the block. I just need to clear my head. I've had a really bad day. I'm going to go call my sister. I just need to talk this through, right? Those are really easy. I'm not asking anybody to learn, some mantra or meditation technique that isn't comfortable to them, right? It's just a very easy distinction of, oh, that's what I'm modeling to my teen when I'm having a hard time, because then they have exposure to that. They copy everything, right? Just like when they were little. I mean, again, when you think about the 0 to 3 and 14 to 17, right? Think about all of those toddlers who are copying what their parents do. It's the same thing with teenagers, right? Or anyone really. So I think it's really important to kind of take a step and think about, what do I want them to learn at this time? And how can I help model that? There's also this challenge of an invisible consequences of use for teenagers, right? They're younger, so they're actually likely to suffer negative side effects less, right? I mean, they probably just they don't get as hungover as you would. I mean, again, thinking about my own value system, like I can't possibly drink like that. Like I would be a disaster the next day, right? So a 17-year-old or a 21, they just might not. There's also a lot less social. I mean, there obviously, this is, all in generalizations. There's certainly times where you are that person that you do not want to be, right, at that party. And it is going to live you down. And it's something that you don't want following you around, right? There is absolutely that opportunity. But more often than not, it's a much more casual, much more fun loving, like, that was a crazy night, right? Whereas if we were adults acting that way, there would be interventions, right? That people would know that this is not okay, right? Something's going on here. The other part that's really quite invisible is that often the desired effect is actually what happens. So they want to be more relaxed. I want to forget about my bad day. I want to be able to talk to that person and I'm too nervous. And so they do things that actually work. Again, that is a real uphill battle for parents, right? Because what they are looking to achieve is accomplished, right? It's just that there are a lot of the negative side effects that are more long-term, right? That they're not thinking about at that time. And all the potential side effects that they might have can be attributed to any number of other things, right? It could have just been, I'm just stressed. It could have been, I'm not hungover, I'm just really tired, or you're just really annoying me, or I just, that teacher was unfair, like, I don't think you did as well on your test as you could because you were probably had substances in your system still. Like, no, the teacher was just really awful, right? It wasn't fair. There's always something else. So I think that that's a really hard thing in thinking about their decision-making about use as well. So does this matter? Obviously, yes. Okay. And this is not a fear anything presentation. You guys all, that's why you're here, right? But this delay is really what we're about, right? So among those who started drinking before age 14, 47% became an alcoholic at some point in their lives. Those who started drinking after, that number was 9%. And that percentage shifts gradually every year. So every year between 14 and 21, it gets a little bit lower. So every year matters, right? It's important to kind of just keep talking. So where to focus? We do not need to convince them that we're right or push our logic. It's not how they necessarily think, right? We do want to communicate our values, but we don't need to just kind of keep pushing the same message all the time about the information and the data, right? If you're going to repeat, it's going to be about your values, your expectations, your limits, your boundaries. That's the stuff that should be just really clear. Need to find something that resonates for them, right? So maybe they don't use because they are just too scared of getting caught, right? That might work for some kids, right? It also might be that it's because I'm on a sports team and I will get kicked off. That's really clear and simple, right? So we want to look for and create, kind of like that rock climbing or that mountain biking. We want to figure out what it is that's going to resonate for them to make this decision, because the decision is likely not going to come from those charts and figures of the long-term use and the negative side effects that happen in 30 years, right? So that's likely not going to be their motivator factor. Peer pressure, not so much, not a thing really these days, which is really lovely and really great. It's wonderful. It's always helpful to be able to kind of come up with, the words that easily will roll off your mouth, when someone asks you if you want to drink, but it's not as if people are saying like, I'm totally not going to be friends with that person. They didn't drink. But it is more fun often to do things with friends who are doing the same thing. It's not saying that there's pressure, but it's not often so much fun to be the only one who's not drinking when everyone else is. So that's more something, right? So you might want to be thinking about, I need to find an activity for my kid and their friends that is fun for all of them, that doesn't involve drinking. And that's going to take a little bit more work, right? But that's where I need to put my energy. I don't need to put my energy on talking to them about peer pressure and how to avoid it and how to, you want to spend your energy in coming up with creative alternatives. Communication, always helpful to be talking about other people, pop culture. It's not personal. There's no judgment, right? It's also helpful to hear their reasons for not using or using, right? It gets them to be able to talk without judgment. It's a spirit of inquiry. The clarity of the messaging is really, really important. But again, know your child. Sometimes that black and white, hugely helpful, right? And also you will know this from day one. I mean, from when they were little, right? There are kids that really thrive on a long-term goal, right? If you read 5 books, I'll get you a chocolate bar, right? And there's other people that say like, okay, thank you, almost done. That I need immediate satisfaction, right? I need to get the reward after a single book in order for this to keep. Your kid, right? So the same way that kind of goes here, right? So sometimes the black and white is really helpful for them. Sometimes that black and white leads to this forbidden fruit thing. And then that's what they're seeking, right? So again, just kind of pick up what they're putting down and be able to adjust, right? Like this was said earlier, which I'm really pleased with, talk to each other without judgment. It can always be your kid who missteps, always, right? And to give yourself, your community, and most importantly, your kid, the opportunity for it to be them and for that to be okay is huge, right? If they are always the good one, right, and they mess up, it can be really hard to fess, right? Because there can be a lot of expectations that that's not supposed to be me, that's other kids, right? So give them that opportunity. And the closing thoughts is to keep talking about this, okay? I used to give presentations at schools that I started to have the same presentation 4 years in a row, right? People would come all 4 years because they found that they had different kids when they were freshmen, they were different when they were sophomores, they were different when they were juniors, and different when they were seniors. So a slide that may have been wildly irrelevant to them, they were like, oh my gosh, that's my kid now, right? So keep talking. You have no idea when that first invitation is going to come, right? And you don't want to assume like, this is not relevant for me, right? You can always have a redo conversation. That's a really important piece. It's a wonderful way to model too. Hey, that conversation really didn't go how I wanted it to, and I'm really sorry, right? Really powerful. Look at the right time, right place. Again, no amygdala conversations, right? You want them to be fed and comfortable and calm. Little doses versus the big talk, right? You just want these little snippets that you're not talking at them, but you're opening up this opportunity for them to share with you, right? And notice what else is going on in their behavior beyond the substances. If you're only looking at the substance use and you're with this eagle eye, with a punitive lens or this discipline, you're missing the bigger picture. If they are using all the time, something else is going on, right? Substance use is about wanting to feel something different. If they are that stressed that they need to let all of that out over the weekend and be unrecognizable, right? All the grounding or whatever you want to do on that weekend is not going to help them get the tools of helping their stress reduction. That's what you want to focus on. Hey, it seems like things are really stressful right now. Do you ever feel that way, right? What are your tools? That's the most important thing. We got to figure out what your tools are. That's what you learn, right? Not the discipline of use or what happens if I do this at this party or not, right? So notice what else is going on beyond the substances. Always be the person to talk and listen. Always, 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 always. That you cannot say that enough, right? No one has ever said my parents listened to me too much, ever, 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 right? And you don't need to have all the information. You don't need to have all the answers, right? All you need to be able to do is to love, connect, have compassion, protect, engage, and show up, okay? I cannot tell you the amount of times that I've worked with high schoolers who say, God, I kind of wish my parents cared that much, when they're talking about their friend with really kind of involved parents, right? That they want that connection. But they do want it in a way that kind of matches where they are. So that's where some of this information hopefully can allow you to get access and meet them where they are and how to connect. So that is me. Do I get to hand it off to Ria? Do I get to?
Not yet.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I don't know that I've ever taken such furious notes. For those of you who are like me and want to watch that again, there will be a recording available and it will go up on the website within a week or so. And I have a feeling a lot of folks are going to want to. That was wonderful. Thank you, Annie, so much. I do want to throw out one question that we did get in the Q&A. We're going to have time to answer questions at the end across the board. We're getting a lot of thank yous in here for you, Annie. But I do want to throw this question out there from someone who has heard about there being a difference in male and female brain development and wondering, is that the case? Is there data to back that up or the contrary at this point? What's your take on that?
Yes. I mean, I think in the simplest of terms, yes, there is a difference. It's just that they are different in just enough different ways that it still leads to the same risk potential. So as an example, so girls have the lucky surge of oxytocin, right? So that slide that was about testosterone, girls would get a surge of oxytocin, which is that's the cuddle hormone. It's what you get as a mom when you give birth, right? So that is often where you will see, teenagers all kind of huddled up or, kind of sitting on each other's laps or grooming each other's hair, right? That's what that is. What that also does is it increases their self-consciousness.
Yeah.
Literally, like chemically. So if you think about again, going back to that selfish, self-centered word that has such a negative connotation, right? Think about how hard that is to be thinking that everyone is looking at me all the time, right? It's not self-centered in a selfish way. It's self-centered in a really burdensome way, right? So we as an adult might get that every so often if we have to, scoot out of our seat in the middle of a movie, right? And you have that feeling of oh gosh, everyone's looking at me, right? A 15-year-old girl can have that walking down the hall at school, any given Tuesday, right? So that is stressful. I mean, it's an uncomfortable way to go through the world, right? So if you have that burden, do you think you might use more substances if you feel like everybody's looking at me all the time? right? It's kind of an uncomfortable feeling, right? So they might want to squelch that, right? So yeah, the boy might have a bit more surge of a testosterone that has them seeking that rush or the physical nature, right? Or the tackle, right? So maybe they are using for that reason, but it's so they're all different, right? But they all seem to point to the same space of, regardless of how my brain is developing, this substance is able to help me feel better, right? In that moment, right? In that moment. So yes, I think that the brain development, it absolutely is, it's kind of undeniable, right? And again, it's not in terms of a stereotype. There obviously are exceptions, but their brains just they develop, different parts develop at different rates.
Great, Annie. And then one thing I want to ask, we always, every session have questions that I think for folks are personal, how to deal with a certain situation or a certain type of teen, my stubborn teen, for example. And we never really have time to answer all of those
Yeah.
questions. But for folks who are dealing with kids who are particularly feisty, particularly stubborn or spirited, we might say, what are your recommendations on what parents
About use in general, or just in their
how to deal with those situations, I think generally in terms of teen behavior, but if you can link that specifically to always helpful.
So I would say that it is just going to take a lot more work in finding what motivates them, right? And when I say motivate, I don't mean like I want you to care about school. I don't mean that kind of motivation. I mean what drives a decision, right? So you want to find all of the legwork, right? All of the legwork is not going to be about that combat of the stubborn. It's going to be about the work that has to happen in advance when you are determining your kind of your guidelines, right? So you need to be able to figure out what it is that they would do, right? What it is that they would work for, what it is that matters to them. And it might be a thing, it might be an experience, it might be a privilege, whatever it is, and stick to it. You can be just as stubborn as they can, right? So that consistency is really, really important. And I think oftentimes when kids are really stubborn and they're just not doing it, they think that their parent will break, right? So if you can tolerate, there is an extinction period, right? That's what happens when you are taking away behaviors and changing them, right? It does extinguish. Sometimes it gets very, very hot, right? And they are going to prove that I can do this. I can stand this. I can go however long you want me to go without this. They will shift, right? It just is human nature, right? So I think it is not that it makes things necessarily easier, but I think having the comfort, or not comfort, that's a euphemism. The awareness, I guess, that I'm doing this for a reason, right? I'm sticking to my guns here for a reason, not because I'm just being stubborn like they are, but because I believe I need to tolerate this. I need to handle this. I need to get all my supports in place. I need to maybe trade off, husband and wife for, a night of this conversation. I can't keep doing it. I need to take care of myself, right? Knowing that they will come, right? It just might take a long time, but them being able to be in your safe space of knowing they're not going to budge. They care that much about me that they're going through this level of misery, right? It's not conscious. It's not anywhere that they're going to say out loud for many, many years to come, but you feel it. You feel it in your limbic system. Okay. And the more that you are able to have those calm conversations, the less their amygdala is activated and the more that they can absorb information.
Awesome, Annie. Thank you so much. We'll come back at the end, I'm sure, with some more questions. You can go ahead and unshare, and I'm going to invite to the forefront Ria, one of my favorite young people in Marin County, without a doubt, who's going to share with us her perspective, given her lived experience as a preteen and a teen in Marin County. So bear with us while we...
Share, sorry. I just seen, stop share, sorry.
There we go.
There we go.
And there's Ria, and she'll go ahead and share with us.
sharing. Did it look okay?
We can see it. It looks like it's the version that has like, oh, there you go. If that works for you, that looks great to us.
Let me try and make this a little bigger. Okay. I think that should work now.
That's terrific. Thanks, Ria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ria, and I'm a current junior at Marin Academy. And I got involved with Marin Healthy Youth Partnerships about a year ago. And since then, I've gotten to work for many of their events and help with organizations such as Raising the Bar. And tonight, I wanted to share my perspective as a high schooler on substance use in Marin County. Okay, so I went to a small and more sheltered middle school, but I did have a lot of friends who went to bigger middle schools. And from my experience, I noticed that there's a big change from elementary to middle school. So middle school is when kids first become teenagers. And at this age, they start to crave and learn about this newfound independence that they're just starting to have. And this independence can often be found through access to social media, being able to hang out with friends more freely, being able to do activities alone. However, sometimes with this independence, many preteens begin to learn about these forbidden substances, which can often seem appealing. So there's a number of reasons why preteens and middle schoolers may begin to experiment and use substances. And a few of these reasons why they may try substances or begin to experiment are popularity, emotional stress, escape, and decrease of family involvement. So I want to talk about these issues a little bit, and I want to start with popularity. So at its essence, popularity is acceptance. As a previous middle schooler, I know that most kids feel awkward in middle school, and the last thing they want to do is feel, look, or be different. Most kids want to be well-liked and easily able to fit in. Unfortunately, this may lead to being introduced to possibly vaping or trying alcohol. By using substances, they begin to feel like they will now be more included and involved in social events. The second factor I want to talk about is emotional stress. When middle schoolers are struggling with emotional problems, they often turn to alcohol or drug use to help them manage painful or difficult feelings. By doing this, they're not very different from the general substance user, but because adolescent brains are still developing, the results of middle schoolers self-medicating or using alcohol can be incredibly problematic. As I talked about before, middle school is an incredibly challenging time for many young people. It's a hard stage of growing up because you begin to feel like you're not in elementary school anymore, but you're also not in high school yet, and thus emotional stress by using substances can actually increase. The third idea I want to talk about is the decrease of family involvement. I believe that this idea is the most important. I noticed that all of a sudden, when kids hit middle school, many parents begin to give a lot more freedom. My suggestion would be that kids in middle school are more receptive to what their parents say, and this is a good time to discuss these issues with them. They may seem young, but they are still being exposed to it. Sometimes middle schoolers act tough, although they may not specifically say it. They want their parents to be there for them. So I wanted to also add on and talk a little bit about how you can help your child and your middle schooler deal with substances. So I believe that it's better to talk before children are exposed to alcohol and other drugs. If you talk to your kids directly and honestly, they're more likely to respect your rules and advice about alcohol and drug use. In middle school, as a parent, you still have access to your child's friends' parents. Make an effort to know the details of their plans and spend time talking to your child about what's happening. But I also want to add, don't pester. I think that that's such an important point too. There's a balance there. As I mentioned before, not talking about alcohol and other drugs still sends your kids a message. Kids don't always have all the facts when it comes to alcohol and other drugs, and if parents don't talk about the risks of underage drinking and substance use, their kids might not be able to see any harm in trying alcohol and other substances. Finally, I want to stress the importance of making your child feel worthy. Many middle schoolers feel doubtful, vulnerable, and insecure. Taking time to talk to your child and make them feel important about their feelings can help disintegrate many of those negative and emotional feelings that lead to that substance use. So I also wanted to talk a little bit and sort of change directions and talk about high school. So before entering high school, I'd probably had the drug and alcohol talk on numerous occasions. People would tell me that peer pressure is real, just say no. However, I didn't understand how real this was until I saw substance use fold out during my freshman year of high school. Though not all teens abuse drugs and alcohol, most teenagers know somebody who does. And I think that that point is so important because I feel like it stands true for so many teenagers across Marin. Youth are exposed to drugs through advertising near their school, as well as social media platforms where drugs can be sold and offered. The latest statistics show that nearly 20% of high school students have been offered, sold, or given drugs on school property in the past year. Social media and messaging apps only continue to make this issue worse. I found that there are two main reasons why teenagers may use drugs and alcohol in high school. One is academic pressure. High school is an exceptionally busy time and period of life and very stressful, and academic pressure in high school is incredibly high. Students face harder classes, are gearing up to go to college, and the pressure to get good grades and do well on exams and succeed in extracurricular activities comes from both parents and teachers. And I know Annie had talked a lot about managing all those things, and that is very difficult for a lot of kids. So overwhelmed by homework and studying, teens sometimes turn to the performance-enhancing drugs to boost their energy and concentration. They may also take drugs to help them sleep better under stress. Taken without a prescription, these drugs can become addictive and cause dangerous health effects. The second thing I want to talk about is peer pressure. And I want to clarify that peer pressure looks and feels quite different than many parents may think. Peer pressure is not somebody forcing a certain substance or drug in your face. Rather, it's the built-up pressure that comes from constantly being surrounded by substance use. The pressure is what drives teens to feel that the only way for them to be accepted or invited to events is by using. I now wanted to talk about how you can help. Although tough, having these conversations is the first step to building healthy relationships. I believe that there are 5 important steps to creating healthy and open relationships with your teens around substance use. First, observe what they do. There are so many ways that you can get to know a person just by paying attention to them. Are they acting out? Are there any behaviors that seem out of the ordinary? Then just listen to them. Whatever it is they share, show that you care. Ask follow-up questions, but don't pressure, just listen. Slowly bring in conversations about drugs or substance use. Relate to them and talk about your experience growing up. It will be helpful for them to understand that you too were once a teenager. From this, you can set healthy boundaries. This is where consequences can then come in. Set reasonable expectations and come up with consequences together so they are clear. If these 5 steps are used correctly, then I definitely believe that everybody can be happy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ria. Thank you so much. I'm going to open this up for questions, but I actually have a question. So I'm going to start while other questions come filtering in because I have that power tonight. It's a question for you, Ria, but it's very much based on something that Annie said. I think the thing that I really clung on to, Annie, from your talk is not a focus on preventing substance use, but a focus on finding what motivates our kids to do other things, right? What is the novelty or the dopamine kick that's not substances? What is the drive to not use and be involved in something else? Like that really, that shifted a lens for me that I really appreciate. And it made me think about Ria, because Ria is like the most motivated person I know. I think last week I asked her if she could give me some time management tips. So I'm wondering, Ria, for you and for folks you know who aren't using, I'm curious what does motivate you, what gets you excited. And I'm wondering if your parents have had any role in shaping that, or is that just chance that you turned out that way?
I definitely think my parents have had a big influence on the way that I view drugs and alcohol. And specifically because they both don't drink a lot, they don't drink in front of me, and if they do, it's at a social event. And there's sort of been like this boundary set, I feel like, between us, where I don't see them drink in front of me, and so I don't feel the need to do that. And I think a lot of it, though, comes from the child. I think it is a big part. Parents play a big role in it. Um, but my parents have always sort of set more hard boundaries that, there's not a lot of tolerance if you drink, things like that. And I know it's very different rules amongst parents that, oh, we'd prefer you to drink in our house. My parents sort of are just like not don't really want me drinking, especially it was a big thing like before junior year too. It's sort of like that's not really even considered when you should be drinking and that thing. And so I definitely think they've had a big influence on me, but it's definitely hard. I mean, for me, I consider myself a very social person. And so I love to go to social events, but I don't like that the big thing is drinking nowadays. And so I found other ways to sort of manage that.
Okay, thanks so much. So we have someone, first of all, saying thank you both for such a fantastic presentation. There's so many books about this subject and the teen brain and communication. Can you recommend one or two that are your favorite? Annie, I'm gonna direct that to you. Favorite books or resources generally? You are on mute still, I think.
Sorry, unmute. Sorry. This panelist thing is new for me too. Sorry. Yeah, I think that anything by Mike Riera is a wonderful, wonderful resource about learning about your kid.
Can you say that name again?
Yes, Mike Riera is, and I can write it. Can I write it in the chat? Am I allowed to do that?
And yeah, would you make
Sure.
sure it's going out to everyone?
Host and panelists. Oh, hold on. Everyone.
Yeah, put that in there for folks.
It might be Michael, I guess, if he's maybe
Great.
Michael Rear. So he does a deep dive into the adolescent brain in so many different capacities. Okay, which I think is what is so important, and they're really focused on connection, right? So one is that I love staying connected to your teenager. Uncommon Sense for Parenting with Teenagers, Field Guide to the American Teenager, right? They're all in this space around understanding what is going on for your kid. And again, I think that the more 30,000 foot view you can get around adolescents in terms of what is going on for them, and if you are able to step out a little bit of the niche concerns of the phone or the gaming or the drug or the, whatever it is, I think that is where you start to see a bit more holistically where I actually need to dive into something, right? So, when Ria was saying to really notice your kid, right? If you're only looking for the problems, like if you're reading all of these books about what, drugs do to the brain, and you're like, read all of these books about how terrifying it is for your kid to be on a screen, right? It's not to say that those things aren't true. I mean, it's helpful information, I think, to know that it's worth the fight. But I think what is more important is getting as many resources, getting shored up in terms of how do I communicate with this person where we are not aligned, right? How do I meet them where they are? What is my access point? And I think that's where really the biggest those are your biggest bang for your bucks, I think. Lisa D'Amour is also someone who I think she's wonderful. She's, quite famous. But she, I think, has a really lovely way of looking at, I'll put her name in here too, just in case. Looking at teenagers. She focuses a lot on girls, but again, so many of these things are just, they're pretty interchangeable. If you're reading it as a parent of a boy, you can very quickly make it, shift the relevance and see where that would play out. So I think, oh, great. She's coming to Marin to speak in March. Yes, she is. She's wonderful. So those are the spaces that I would be really kind of spending my time.
Awesome. Okay, we have somebody who is looking back at similar to when I was you mentioned finding what motivates your kid to not use. Is it a fear of getting caught, for example? Is it a sport team? um, how do you find that out? That's the question.
I can start and answer a
Sure.
little bit.
Great.
But I think, I mean, for me personally, what motivates me not to use, I think is just I've seen what it's like when people are under the influence, and it's really scary and it's really sad. And I know that there's so many reasons out there why people don't use. I know that being on a sports team is a big one. I mean, for me, I've used that as well. And a lot of people are like, oh, I have practice the next day. And some people say, oh, that's like a good excuse that you can use. But I think it's genuinely so true for so many people is that they play a sport and they're very invested in that, or they have an activity that they have to do, or a lot of times it'll be, oh, my mom is going to call me at night. My mom is going to text me and I need to be sober. I need to make sure I respond because otherwise she'll get mad, like that kind of thing. And so I feel like that was one thing in my presentation that I did want to mention too, was that checking in with your child or whatever it is, if it's a text or something, because sometimes even though they might be annoyed to get that text or whatever it is, they actually are probably going to thank you for that, because it feels great to know that somebody is watching over you in that kind of way. And whether it's just a little bit of distance from a text or it's a phone call, I think that's what motivates a lot of people to not use
Awesome.
during.
Ria, you kind of answered our next question, actually, which was sort of about like back pocket excuses to get out of a situation where you don't want to use. But I'm going to bounce back to Annie for young people who aren't looking for the excuses not to use, who might use, and parents looking to find out what's going to help motivate them not to.
Not to use.
Yeah. Like as parents, how do we actually figure that out?
That you will, well, first of all, you will know when it's not working, right? So it is, behavioral change is as simple as it can be in terms of the, psychological landscape, right? So either the consequence that you put didn't work because they continued to use, right? Or it did. So I think that it's really important to be able to be iterative, right? Back to those slides of these are constant communications, right? So I think that you want to be able to, like Ria said, in her side, you're coming up with consequences, you're coming up with rules of engagement, right? And maybe everyone at the table thinks that this will work. You need to have an active participant, first of all, right? If you do not have an active participant, there is no consequence that is going to work because they will get around it, right? It's not, they'll lie, they'll, that's something to notice too when you're talking about noticing people's behaviors, right? If there's a lot of lying, sometimes kids get so caught up in the lying that they start lying about like lots of things that are wildly irrelevant, right? That it just starts to become a new pattern in their brain. Again, thinking about those pathways. So if they are up to things that they know that they shouldn't be doing, often that will come up in like really weird ways of like, no, you didn't just brush your teeth, right? Like, I know you didn't. Like, why are you lying? Like, what is going on here, right? Notice those things. Notice them, right? So you want to have an active participant. So if you have an active participant, you will figure out what works because you will come up with it together. And if they continue to use, then you need to come up with something different. Okay, so that's, it just kind of as black and white as that is, right? If you don't have an active participant, and that's generally where, when someone is like, I don't care, I want to drink at this party, you all are being ridiculous. Everybody does this, right? That like, you've just got to lay low. Like, you're going to ground me for the rest of my high school career. Like, no, I'm doing this, right? That is where you might be having, back to that stubbornness, some really hard lines that might feel a little absurd, but if it is important to you, right? First, you need to think about, and you need to be on the same page, right? Is this worth it? Is this what we are going to put our foot down on? right? Because if you're wavering, they will smell that a mile away, right? That they will know that if I do this enough, they're going to break, right? So if this is really something that you care about, that, you know what, like, I know you don't agree. This is so important to dad and me for reasons that you might not understand, right? I'm going to give them to you. You can choose to listen or read or absorb them if you want to, but I'm not coming in out of the blue and just kind of being draconian, right? But this is incredibly important to us, right? That you abstain from use while you were in high school. I know it seems impossible. We also know that it is not, right? We know that it feels like everyone is doing this. And we know that that is not entirely true. It might be the people that you want to be hanging out with that night. It might be everyone that you see on TV. We're not dismissing your reality, but we know that there's other ways. We just need to work really hard to be able to find what else is going to make you tick, because this is really important. And in the meantime, no, you're not going to that party, and no, you're not getting your driver's license, and no, like, you're putting hard rules down through connection, right? They might not like you, but you're not going to be angry at them the whole time. That you're really looking to how can we make this work together.
Great. Annie, I have one more question that's a bit of a follow-up. I am looking at the time, so we'll try to make it swift, but it's a great question, and it's a follow-up from someone whose child was using marijuana, and they tried a behavioral contract, but felt like it was pretty disastrous, actually, pushed him farther away. And this parent is saying what they wish they focused on is why he got more into use and anxiety and depression. So what's your position on not punishing a kid, but opening up that conversation about what's going on to help them? So there's this hard line, but what about when you know your kid's really struggling?
Yeah, I think that
Great
you will
question.
know if you are developing a contract and that kid is pushing and screaming and does not want to, they're not going to follow it. Right? So sometimes a contract can be helpful. Again, some kids like the black and white. They just do. Right? Maybe there is a reward at the end of this contract as well. Right? Maybe, maybe it serves them. Maybe, but if you're finding that what you're doing is driving everybody apart, right? That it might be that you are doing something, and I hesitate to give this type of feedback in a setting like this, as opposed to actually one-on-one, because I don't want people to be like, good Lord, like, what kind of, privilege is she exhibiting here? But just as a generalization of an option, right? You might be doing really big sacrifices in your adult life to be able to meet the needs of your kid, to be honest, right? When the rule was that if you did this, then you do not go out the next night, right? And that happens, it might be, you know what, honey, we're not going to the party that we're supposed to go to. We're going to stay home with them. I don't think that they want to be with me. I don't care. We're going to ask if they want to go out to sushi. We're going to see if they want to go to dinner. This is not about us being angry at them. It is about us being with them.
So
Okay.
you're like maintaining the structure, but also maintaining the connection.
Absolutely. You know what, honey, this weekend is going to be nearly impossible. I totally get that. I totally get it. It is 2 parties in a row. There was a homecoming dance, and I feel like it is going to be really hard. What would you say about you and me going to a, road trip? I can cancel my plans. Let's go up to, to a Airbnb someplace and just kind of go tubing. Let's just do something totally different, right? That show of you are that important to me that I am going to be in this mess with you, right? Finding new ways to engage, finding new ways to connect, making it so clear that I am not angry at you, right? Those things are really, really helpful. Even if you get the first 5 times of like, God, no, I am not going to a movie with you. The last thing I'm going to do is go away with you, right? That might happen, but you're going to keep, you are lather, rinse, repeating with teenagers, right? They live at your home. They're not going anywhere. So you have a lot of opportunities to do it over.
Thank you. We're approaching the end of our time here. There's a couple more questions, but we do like to let folks out on time. I will say that some of the questions that are coming in, going back to the role modeling, are about helping your kids not use when your own history has use in it. You did recommend some resources. If there's any other resources you want to throw out for folks, now's an awesome time to do it.
There's such a mixed bag around your own use and whether you share. I mean, I can find
for it. I know.
I can find equal articles that say don't ever share and share. I mean, it's really quite fascinating. It's one of the biggest kind of yin yangs around this practice, I think. I think, one thing that is incredibly important, obviously, is, marijuana is you're talking about apples and oranges, not even apples and oranges. You're talking about like Doritos and an apple. It's a different product that just simply has the same name for some reason. It's so I think in terms of that use, that is an easier one to be able to distinguish between, right? Because it is so much more potent. I mean, it's just apples and oranges. Drinking, I think that it's helpful to be able to explain that there are not necessarily what you wish you had known, but things that you did not know, right? Things that happened to you, right? That might not have gone so well and you wondered why. And maybe even thinking about the things you missed out on, right? Like, honey, when I look at you and what you're exposed to right now, like, I didn't have stress reduction techniques until I was like 42, right? And I feel like it really impacted me. Like, I feel like my first job, I didn't perform as well. I feel like I was not able to engage in relationships. I feel like I did not know who I was. I feel like I didn't have friends that really felt authentically like on par with me until after college. And I'm realizing now that that's because all I connected with was around drinking. Like, that is how I connected. That was the common thread. And I finally found myself when I was able to be myself authentically without using. And that's what I want for you. And I didn't have that. No, did I, am I a disaster? Am I not successful? Like, no, of course not, right? Like, there's lots of those things. But as parents, we learn and we grow. I mean, the same way that I parent you differently, God, I hope that my parents parented me. We just know more, right? We ask more questions. It's not that I never use, it's not that I don't understand, but there are some things that I wish I had done differently.
Thank you so much. I know there's still some lingering questions. We're going to have to say goodbye. I think there's some questions about continued use and adult continued use. And I think those are the kind of questions where you want some one-on-one support on that. And so I'm going to put you in that direction. And thank you for asking such a wonderful and vulnerable question. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to the folks who showed up tonight. Again, if you found tonight valuable, MHIP is always looking for ways to continue doing this work. And if Linda, you can plop in that spot to donate if folks are feeling merry this holiday season. Please complete that post-event survey. We'll put that link in there as well. You also get entered in a raffle for a DoorDash gift card, which we're all using. And we just appreciate y'all being here so much. Our speakers, our community that comes together, so many of us to do this work together. That's so special. And we'll really look forward to seeing you all in the new year. Okay.
Thank you, Rhea, for sharing your night with us.